Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Soundies, hope you're doing well out there. Thanks to everyone for joining today. Today is the 3rd of October, 2021. It's going quickly. So today we have a few things going on. Let me just switch over to my agenda here and let's show you what we've got for today. So first up, well, basically all that's up today is a question and answer session, and then we'll spend some time playing around a little bit. We do have the mixer out today, the bigger mixer. So this is the Allen & Heath SQ5, and we'll probably take a look at that. And then we do have some questions I want to run through first, and then we will come back to the chat and just have a conversation and talk about anything that you all have going on out there. So first up, let's jump into our questions. We have a couple of them. First from Mark. Mark asks, we're shooting a car promo at the end of the month, and I'm considering how best to capture the car sound. I'm thinking about an NTG3 mounted at the rear in a blimp and windsock to get exhaust sound. Maybe an AT4053 for the interior sound. It's an open top car, and again, an NTG3 for the drive-by. Any advice? And then also Mark showed us, this is the car that they're going to be recording, which looks like a lot of fun. So I have not, I don't have extensive experience recording cars. However, we did have an interview with Watson Wu. Watson does a lot of that type of work. So he records lots of automotive type sound effects and usually performance vehicles, and then also firearms. And we did an interview with him last year, actually about this time last year, I think it was. And I have put a link down below to that session so that you can check that out. Hopefully that's helpful for you. A lot of times I think they put, I don't know about shotgun microphones like an NTG3, so you're gonna have to, that's gonna be a little bit more sensitive to how you aim it. I know that Watson sometimes uses dynamic microphones for recording vehicles, especially if he's recording something that's especially loud. So I have heard of him using dynamic microphones for the exhaust, oftentimes lavalier microphones in the engine compartments. So this is a case where you may not necessarily want things that are super directional, but again, you can experiment with that as well and see what works well for your situation. So if there's a particular part of the, inside the vehicle that you want to record and you want something a little bit more directional, that's where a 4053 probably makes a little bit more sense. But I'd experiment around a little bit. I don't know how much time you'll have with the vehicle, but I would get it's good of you to be asking ahead of time, preparing for that so that you're in a pretty good spot when it starts. So definitely go check out that. He talks a little bit about how his microphone techniques there. He also has some other information on, I believe he's got a YouTube channel. He's also active over on Twitter. So those are all different places you can catch up with him, and his name is Watson. He recorded all of the sound effects for, what was the movie called? Baby Driver? Baby Driver. Yes. So that was a film that relied very heavily on the sound design, and so he was involved in that, and he's done lots of other recordings for other movies and for video games. So he's very experienced in that front, and he should have some good information for you. Okay. We do have a question here. Andres, for the car recording, he can also check Alex Knickerbocker's channel. He recorded the fastest car ever. There you go. There's another one. Alex Knickerbocker is a good choice as well. He usually does post, but he also, he's recorded cars as well. So definitely worth checking out. Thanks for that, Andres. Okay. The next question is one I'm going to need some help with, but I do have some ideas here. Lewin asks, I have my first job this week being hired as a sound mixer. I'm pretty nervous, but I know I can get good sound for interviews as I do it all the time because I'm a one-man band for video. My two questions are, how did you get started in audio and, by extension, media? And then second question, how did your growth take place? I feel like people in media expect you to have all the professional tools and gear at the beginning of the journey. Okay, good questions. Excuse me. First up, how did you get started? I bought a USB microphone, and some of you will laugh when I tell you this. This is some years ago, so this was probably 2006, I think. I bought a Blue Snowball. It was a USB microphone, and I could afford it at the time. And the motivation I had for buying it was that I wanted to do voiceover for a book I was writing. And it was okay. It wasn't amazing, but it was okay. And that's what I started with. And then shortly after that, my brother, who is a musician, bought a Pro Tools rig and recording equipment that went with it. So he bought a Neumann microphone and a Universal Audio analog preamp compressor EQ, as well as at the time it was a Digi 003 audio interface. He and his wife were actually staying here when they bought it, and they picked it up in Salt Lake, and they came and stayed with us. I don't know if you remember that, but Carrie and I brought it downstairs here into this very room, and we got it all set up and started learning our first things about audio recording. And then, of course, he went back home. He spent a lot of time with it, and he had some mentors that helped him really learn how to use it. And then I, over the years, spent time with him and learned some additional things from him. So that's how I got started. He, in some respects, was my mentor. But then, of course, I reached out to other people to learn as much as I could as well. Online, going to different forums. I don't know if they're I think they're still active. jwsoundgroup.net is where a lot of the production sound mixers spend time. There are now some Facebook groups. I don't use Facebook, so I'm not as familiar with those. But there are some active production sound Facebook groups as well. So those can be places to, it's interesting, jwsoundgroup.net started by Jeff Wexler. So he was a longtime production sound mixer. He was one of the kind of the pioneers in some respects in terms of doing digital recording on set for a major film. So he was using ADAT before most other people were using ADAT on set. And he started this group up. He does a very good job trying to keep everything civil there, although it seems like sometimes some of the mixers get a little bit rambunctious and critical. So, just be prepared. Put on some thick skin before you go there. If you ask newbie questions, you'll get different responses. So just put on your thick skin and tough it out. There's a lot to learn there. There's a lot of opinion throwing going on there too, which is fine. Everyone's got, their experience and can share their opinions, but those are some things that are worthwhile. I think finding communities like this, we try really hard to keep this community as positive and encouraging and helpful as possible. So I hope everyone's finding it to be that way. So those are things you can do. There's nothing that could replace an in-person mentor if you are, in a position to do that. I would love to have a mentor, certainly in the earlier days when I was getting started. If you can find something like that, even if you're volunteering for a time to help them out. And you have to remember, if you do that and you do offer to help them out, don't expect them to sit you down at the mixer and control the mixer initially, or for you to just sit there and watch everything they do. They're probably going to want you to help. So if they ask you to run back to the vehicle and pick up, 2 cables or something, you have to be willing to put something into that relationships because they're giving you so much as well. So try and make it as equitable as possible and help them out as much as you can. Even if it's stuff that isn't, super exciting at first. But over time, if you develop a relationship where they trust you, I think you'll find that, most good mentors will start to teach you some things that you couldn't learn any other way, or would take a lot longer to learn through experience. So those are some thoughts on that. How did your growth take place? I feel like people in media expect you to have all the professional tools and gear at the beginning of the journey. It really depends on what level you're working at. If you are working on a union job on a big, large budget film or TV production, then yes, there are some things that are, just sort of expected. In those cases, those are businesses. They're trying to make money, and they need professionals there that can provide everything that they need. So in those cases, certainly, there is an expectation there, and that is definitely what's you're going to need to do if you want to operate at that level. However, there are plenty of operations or things where you can start to cut your teeth and get more experience that aren't so high stakes and where the expectations aren't so high. So, if you have to do things where you're working on smaller scale corporate type pieces, it sounds like you're already a one-man band in terms of video. But in those cases, if you can hire yourself to other corporate video shooters as a sound mixer and start to get experience there, I think the expectations are often lower. They're just really looking for someone to offload, in many cases offload, so they don't have to worry about sound themselves, so you can be 100% focused on sound. And usually their requirements aren't super high. I mean, you're not going to have to show up with an Aton Digital Kantar X3 and 43 microphones and wireless channels and, so on and so forth. You're not going to have to do that. So, if the budget's lower, they should have more realistic expectations as well. So if they're paying you, less than $1,000 equivalent, I don't know which market you're in. Every market's a little bit different in terms of what kind of pay you can demand. But if they're not also renting the equipment from you, they need to have realistic expectations as well. So those are some thoughts there. If anyone in the chat has other thoughts that they can share with Lewin, that would be really helpful. And Lewin, congrats on your first job as a sound mixer. Get out there and make some great sound. I'm excited for you. This is where you gain that kind of experience, is when you actually hire yourself out and go and do the job. So these are the things where you learn, be as prepared as you possibly can. Consider all the potential risks, all the potential failure points. If you're prepared for those, your client will have a good experience and they will probably be likely to hire you again. So good luck. All right. That is actually everything that we had submitted ahead of time. So what I wanted to do was, let's go to the overhead cam. I want to show you the mixer we're using today. So we're using a different audio setup today. I don't know if you can hear a difference, but we are using the SQ5. It's an Allen & Heath mixer, and it's a digital mixer. What's interesting about it is that that's actually sitting behind me. Yeah, there's my hand if I reach back. But I also have control of it on an iPad app. And so let's switch to the iPad app, Danny. So here's the iPad app that I'm actually using to control it right now. It's a pretty simple setup today. We have the phone right here. I just muted it. You can see there. That's the phone channel. Over here is my main channel, and you can see as I move the fader, it'll fade me out a little bit. You can probably hear less of me now and then back up to normal, so you can hear me there. Danny, I have another mic set up here for Danny, so Danny, if you want to pick up your mic there real quick.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yep, there's Danny on that mic. And I mute her again when she's not talking, just to keep things clean here. So the cool thing about this is that I can control pretty much everything. In fact, if you switch back to the overhead cam real quick, Danny, you can see that as I move the fader here on Danny's channel on the mixer, it's actually a motorized fader, so I can control that. But I can also, if we go back to the app, I can come in here. If I go into Danny's channel here, now I have access to the preamp, so I can set the gain. I can apply a delay if I need to, for if you're live streaming and you're sending audio to a switcher, and you need to apply a delay so that the audio is in sync with the video, you can do that. We've got a high pass filter. We've got a noise gate. We have additional inserts that we can apply, an EQ, and even a compressor. So the cool thing about this is that we can actually use this to control almost everything. Of course, I have my master fader over here. I'm going to go ahead and pull that down so you can see it on the right-hand side, and then I'm pulling it back up. So that's the master fader over on this side right here. And we have our, the master meter is the one on the right, and then we have a pre-fader listen meter up at the top on the right-hand side as well. And then of course I can switch between banks here. I've got a whole bunch of different inputs that I can control. Tons of them, in fact. And so I'll switch back to the first bank there. I can also do other things here. This is, okay, let me actually give some background on why I'm talking about this. This is not to show off how cool my mixer is. This is actually to kind of familiarize you with what we're seeing there. For some reason, we just had that little black box show up again. Sorry about that. I think that my HDMI adapter for the laptop is bugging out a little bit here, and it's bringing the chat box in. So actually, let's turn the chat key off for now. All right, there we go. So that shouldn't bug us for now. Okay. So the reason I'm showing this to you is just to kind of expose those of you that are new to these types of mixers. Just getting a little exposure is always a good thing, and seeing what's possible out there is a good thing, and just get you ready for someday when you're at the mixing board. You can make your way around and figure out what you're doing. And this one is so deep. This particular mixer is so deep that I don't even know everything about it yet. In fact, there's one thing, for example, if I go to I think it's the utility. Here, for example, is the automatic mic mixer. That's what the AMM stands for. And you can see I can assign different microphones to them. I can actually apply a little bit of a filter here so that it becomes, I kind of fine tune the way that it filters. So I can apply a high pass and a low pass. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. In fact, let me go back and unmute Danny's mic. Okay, so if I unmute Danny's mic, if you go ahead and say something.
Hi, how's it going?
We're getting some microphone bleed?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we are. So let's go over to the automatic mic mixer. Let's turn it on. So now I'm talking.
Okay, and I'm talking also.
Okay, you can see that it adjusts things here, and I can actually pull a fader down a bit more. So when I stop talking and Danny starts talking.
Hi, how's it going? And how's it going, really?
So I can actually fine-tune this one. This one's pretty interesting because I get a lot more control over how it works. Again, I can apply a high pass or a low pass filter. Here, the idea is that I really just want it to latch onto the voice, not any sort of low frequency energy in the room or really high frequency energy. So that's pretty nice. And you can see it's attenuating her mic quite a bit right now as I talk. And now as I stop and she starts talking.
Hi, how's it going? I can't think of anything else to say.
You got to think of something else.
I have to think of something else. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, cool. So that's the automatic mic mixer. I'll go ahead and turn that off for now. And I'll mute you. Okay, let's actually set up Danny's mic, and I'm going to actually be quiet here. So I need to give you a book or something that you can read from or something you can say.
I'll think of something else.
You'll think of something. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, and we're going to walk through how I would go about setting up her channel. She's on a dynamic microphone, a KSM8 for Shure, and here we go.
We have a comment from the chat that both Emma and I sound good on the Shure KSM8. Let's see. We have quite a few questions about this mixer, so I can go through those when we're done with this demo. I am talking a little slowly because I have the headphones only on one ear, and it's the delay or whatever's going on is really kind of disorienting. So I think what my ears are telling me and what my voice is saying is getting me a little bit, I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking of things to say. But I noticed a few of you said you have really nice autumn weather. And this week we also have really nice autumn weather. The trees are turning colors, and we've had a couple of rainstorms earlier. Well, in the late summer, we had a couple of rainstorms, and that helped with the autumn colors. If you have them too close to when the trees are turning, the leaves just fall off. Okay, I'm being told to stop.
Let's have you take your headphones off.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's crazy disorienting.
It's terrible, actually. Okay. This is much better. Yeah, that was very odd. Very, very odd. So what I was trying to explain about the autumn colors is we had a little bit of moisture late in the summer, which I think helped the trees be a little happier. And so then as the temperatures cooled down and the chlorophyll went away, we've got some nice colors in the trees. It's it's lovely to look at. They're starting to fade a little bit, but we've got some different waves of colors. First, we have the maples with bright red, and then we start getting aspens, and those are really ramping up now with bright yellow. And then later in the season, we'll have the oaks last, and they're kind of a muted brown, but it's all very nice. So that's a good thing about the autumn, as well as the cooler temperatures. Another interesting thing I learned this week is that the deer that live around our house love tomatoes. So I picked everything that I could find that looked like it would ripen earlier in the week, and then around Friday or Saturday, both Curtis and I saw several deer just really chowing down on the green tomatoes that were left. So they really enjoy those.
Okay, thanks to Danny for being a good sport there and talking to us for a while. I hope that was, you found everything that she had to say informative and interesting. So let me just kind of run through what I did here on the overall thing. So first of all, I was gaining up, and I generally was looking, in this particular case, we are using a dBu meter here. So typically on analog mixers and even most digital mixers today, the mixing boards, you will, in fact, let me just switch back to mine so you can see what I'm talking about here. So you can see that it tops out, this one actually tops out, I believe, at plus 20 dBu. So dBu is a measure of, it's different than a dB full scale meter, which is what we're used to seeing on computers, and actually a lot of the field mixers these days are now using digital full scale meters. So this is actually a dBu meter. dBu meter is basically measuring electrical power. I'm not sure that's the right term. It's measuring the, and I don't know if is it current or voltage. I think it's voltage. So I think it's measuring voltage. So it's a different scale, and that's why it goes above zero. So typically on an analog board like this, you're generally going to aim to have the peak somewhere around zero, maybe just a little bit higher. So that's kind of the first thing that I did in terms of setting up the gain. So let me switch back over to hers now. We just put a high pass filter on there just again to take care of any rumble and kind of low energy stuff that that isn't her voice and that we didn't really need in the recording or the stream here. I did play around with the gate a little bit. I don't think we really needed that here. It's not super noisy here. So, but generally here, you can see that when I stop talking, the ambient level sitting somewhere around minus 58 or somewhere on this meter. So what I need to do is that I would use that to set a threshold here, so that when the audio falls below this threshold, then you can see here, watch this come down. That's the gate engaging itself. So the idea is that when you come above that threshold, you don't want it to engage. And then when it falls below, you do want it to engage. And then the depth is how much attenuation it's going to do. You can just grab that and move that here, or you can grab and move it over here, whichever makes more sense. I generally, try not to do more than about 9 to 12 dB of attenuation on a gate, typically. And then, of course, you can fine-tune your attack, hold, and release. I find that if the release is too long, you kind of get this kind of sound as it engages, but you also don't want it so fast that it cuts off the end of the words, or it sounds it's clamping down really fast. So there's some of that there as well. As far as EQ, we played around a little bit. I didn't find any really bad resonances in this particular room, in her particular voice on that particular microphone, so I didn't really apply anything there, but I did boost and sweep back and forth just a little bit, and you can see this is basically the Q here, or the width of the booster cut that you're doing. So we didn't end up using that. And as far as compressor is concerned, we used a fast attack, basically the fastest we could, release of about 500 milliseconds, which is about half a second. Our ratio, we're going for relatively mild here at 3:1. We just want it to really be able to make her voice loud and present without affecting the timbre of it too much. Maybe make it a tiny bit beefier, but not a whole lot. We set our threshold here. This is the point at which it kicks in. You can see as I adjust that, it changes that curve a little bit here, and we ended up with that at right around 8, as I recall. We use the soft knee. You can see if you change the soft knee basically starts the compressor. The compressor engages sooner, but it It's sort of a curve. So it doesn't do the entire ratio until you get a little bit higher, if that makes sense. So you can see how that's changing the curve there, that the blue is the actual threshold. And you can see how it changes the characteristic there a little bit. So visually, that changes the curve. Audible-wise, the idea is that it makes it, at least in theory, more transparent, a little bit of a smoother action. So as her voice, as she's talking and she's hitting up against the threshold, it kicks in sort of a weighted sort of fashion. So it's just not super obvious and super kind of digital on and off. It's more of a kind of eases into the compressor as she talks louder and louder. So that's how that went. So the threshold, we, again, compressing at 3:1, so every 3 dB over the threshold, it gets essentially moved down to 1 dB over the threshold. That's how much it's compressing. The threshold in this case is 8.4 dB, so it's above 0. Again, that's because we're working on a dBu scale here. And then this is makeup gain here, this right here. And we ended up setting that to about 5. Again, at that point, what we were looking at is we were looking at the output meters just to make sure she was coming in about the same level I was and sounding good and present on the whole thing. So that's basically how we went about doing that. Let's go back over to our main camera and to the chat and see what kind of questions we have so far. Danny's going to pull those up. Yep, go ahead and put that key back on. Apologies for our key. It looks like we're having a hardware issue with our adapter on the laptop that's running the chat today. So that one's been giving me a grief for a little bit. I think we've just worked it out. All right, here we go. First from Peter, I'm curious why there is still meter movement on the KSM8 when it is muted while the SR314 is unmuted. Yeah, definitely come back, if you go back into the iPad for us, Danny, real quick. All right, so let's go ahead and pop that chat down here. Yes, so what that does, that's just telling you that you have levels coming in, so it's detecting them. So if I come in to the preamp here, yes, you're still seeing levels there because that's my voice bleeding over into that microphone. But because we have it muted, it's not being fed into the overall mix here. So the idea there is that so you can see which microphones are actually picking stuff up, what you have microphones connected to, even though you have them muted so that they're not contributing overall to the mix. So that's the idea there. That's why they do that. Good question, Peter. Okay, coming on back. Lloyd, talking with a delay in your ear is so difficult to do. Good job. And talking live in order to get EQ compression at all set is weird for me. Instead, I record dry into the mix pre, then play it through the channel strip repeatedly. I agree. If you're trying to EQ your own voice, you're going to have to find a different way to do it. Doing it live is just not, it's not realistic. I mean, maybe some people that are super experienced can do it, but two of the most experienced people here just told us how they do it, and it's not trying to do it live. It's actually, doing a recording or something like that to tune it on your own voice. So definitely a tip for you there. If you are getting set up for a live stream, I would record and get it set up there so that when you get on the live stream, you're not trying to listen to your own voice while you're talking, which is almost impossible to do. Group 1 to 4 on the bottom right, are those audio subgroups or DCAs? Let's go back. That is a good question. If I switch to that, see that's the mix selector, and I do have DCA, so this does support DCA or VCAs. And I have to confess, Lloyd, I am not particularly familiar with that whole. I've looked it up and read about it, but I've never used them, so I'm not entirely sure how it works because I'm not usually recording bands, and so I think that's typically where it's going to be more useful. But if I switch here, I think we're going to lose the main mix. Let me try it. So when I talk now, is it still coming through okay? Oh, okay, we're still coming through. All right. Yeah, Lloyd, I'm going to need your help on that. I don't know the answer to that. This is where you switch to the different mixes so you can control them. And I think, let's see here, can adjust those. And I don't know. I'm going to have to do some more on that. In fact, Lloyd, next time you're in the Salt Lake area, come on by and let's do a live stream and you can show us how to do that. Appreciate that. Or next time I'm in your neck of the woods, I'll bring it with me. All right. Danny's looking through the chat here. She had something. Tim, does the mixer use Bluetooth to connect and send signals, or is it network connected? Between the mixer and the iPad, I mean. Okay, so yes, so what they have to be on the same network. In the case of the mixer, it's actually a wired connection. So it's an Ethernet cable. There's an RJ45 jack on the back. And then the iPad itself, in this particular case, is connecting wirelessly to the same network. So they're all going into a Ubiquiti Dream Machine router. And then off of those, we have several different switches. So they're all connected to the same network, and that's how they communicate. So in the case of the iPad, it's Wi-Fi. In the case of the SQ5, it's wired connection to the network. How much is this mixer? I presume thousands of dollars. Yeah, I think this one's, when I bought it, when it was brand new, it was $2,500 US. I believe now it's retailing for closer to $3,000 US for, I guess I should say that. That's something interesting. It's an interesting topic because a lot of times with consumer goods, we're used to prices going down over time. What I have generally found is that with professional gear, a lot of times the prices go up over time. And the reason for that, part of the reason for that, in my experience as a product manager, is that in the case of the professional gear, it's pretty niche. They're not coming off of massive assembly lines. So it's fairly niche, and as the cost basis for any of the components go up, they have to raise the price of the overall unit itself. So I have to say that $2,500 for this particular mixer was a steal at the time. $3,000 is probably closer to what it's really worth. Maybe even that's still pretty good. I don't know, but yeah, that's a little bit about the pricing there. All right, we've got some more here in the chat.
Yes.
We do. Okay, bring it on.
Trying to.
Danny's sorting it out here for us. All right, Tim, I've got a 2-channel Dante USB adapter. Wonder if that would work with the Allen & Heath. Yes, the Allen & Heath actually has a port on the back, or a slot on the back, I should say, to add a Dante card and controller. And so, yes, you could use that with your Dante USB adapters. So I have not purchased the Dante card yet, but it does have a Dante card, and you can attach it. They also make, Allen & Heath also makes what are typically called stage boxes, but they also have a Dante version of that. So you can, it has something like 12 or 18 inputs, I can't remember. So they have those as well. And those are Dante enabled. Christopher, has Allen & Heath added an auto mixer like several other vendors, notably Yamaha and SD, with licensed Dugan auto mixing? Well, this one comes with its own automatic mic mixer. We were actually looking at that a little earlier here today. So it does have its own auto mixer, and they don't have, as far as I'm aware, anything licensed from Dan Dugan as far as auto mixing. So they're not using the same algorithm. They're using their own. But we can switch back over to that again if you want to move to the iPad again, Danny. So this is the automatic mic mixer here. And you can, first of all, of course, you assign which microphones. I think for each mixer, you can have 8 input channels. And let's go ahead and turn it on right now. Danny's muted, so we're not getting anything from her. Let's go ahead and open her mic. So you can see it's attenuating her right now as I talk. And then as she talks...
Hi, I'm talking. How's everything going? Oh no, I still have the headphones on.
Yeah, she's got the headphones on. She sounds, people when they talk with headphones on sound like they're under the influence, basically. Here's where you assign the different channels that you want within the auto mixer, and then here's where you adjust the high pass and low pass filters as part of the sidechain filter to feed the automatic mic mixer. So essentially you can roll off the lows and the highs. So it's very focused on the voice, for example, if that's what you're using it for. So this would typically be used for a panel discussion, most likely. So that's an example of the automatic mic mixer here in the Allen & Heath. I don't believe you have the ability to, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and mute Danny's mic. I don't think you have the ability to to license Dan Dugan auto mixing on this. I don't think you can license anything except for directly from Allen and Heath, and as far as I'm aware, they haven't licensed Dugan's auto mixing. So good question. Well, Mr. Rob Christiansen, thank you very much for the Coffee and Tea Fund. Very much appreciated. I hope your live stream is going well with the... I noticed you did it at a different time today, and I missed it. I apologize for that. But for those that don't know, Rob does almost everyone here knows, Rob does a live stream movie reviews, and they overanalyze films between Rob, his partner Jim, partner in crime, I should say, Jim, and then special guests from time to time. So thanks, Rob, for that. Daniel, checking B&H now that I've heard what model it is. It appears to be $3,699. Okay, even more than I thought. So it's gone up in price, it appears. So that's what we're looking at here. I got an absolute steal on it then. From Ronnie, the iPad interface seems to be very responsive. BU, some web interfaces are impossible to use with a lot of delay for compression or gate. Yeah, this one seems pretty good. In fact, I, in the past, have not been very fond of mixing on a touch surface because, again, a lot of them are not very good. But if we switch back over to the iPad here, Danny, really quickly, these faders seem like, especially faders and things like that, seem really unresponsive on touch, or they do this weird thing where they jump. You know, when you touch, like if I were to touch down at 20 dB on Danny's channel here, this KSM8 channel, now what it does is it just actually holds it there. And I found a lot of them would actually do this big jump all of a sudden. So it was really twitchy and really difficult to work with. They've really done a nice job with the touch interface, and it's A, very responsive, but B, in terms of like the meters and stuff like that, but also very responsive in terms of the touch interface. So when I grab a control, I'm not constantly fighting with it to, kind of, as soon as I put my finger down, then there's like a period of, 500 milliseconds on a lot of them where you're just trying to get a sense for where things are, and then you can control it. This one is very responsive and works really quickly and nicely. So this is the first time I've used a touch interface like this that I would actually feel comfortable mixing on. So yeah, they've done a nice job implementing it. And I can't think of a bad thing about this mixer yet as far as my use cases are concerned. It's all been very good. Okay, we'll come back to the main cam and the chat here and see what else we've got going. Brian says, did you fix the ATEM freezing and what happened? Well, let's talk about that. There are, I don't know exactly what happened. Here's what I can say of what I observed. When that happened a couple of weeks ago, we were midstream, and when I went to the ATEM software control, I could still switch cameras. I could still access the audio mixer in the software. Everything was working fine as far as that's concerned. But in fact, let's switch over to the Mac here. When I went here, whoops, I shouldn't be showing that. I'm not going to show this tab because it has my streaming key on it right now. But when I went to the output tab and I went to try to stop and restart the stream, it said it was on air, and yet YouTube said it was receiving nothing. And so we were having, that was the issue we were having. So I don't know what was going on there and why that happened. So what we ended up doing was actually powering down the ATEM, powering it back up, and then everything was fine there. The problem we were having with the chat that day was that we didn't reset we had to pull out the adapter from the laptop and then reseat it. We didn't realize this until after the stream. Replug in the adapter to have it renegotiate the HDMI signal again. So that's what happened there. So we can come back to the main camera here. The reason, one thing that's very important to understand, a lot of times, and this is a little bit of a tangent, you didn't ask this question. So I guess the short answer, Brian, is I don't know why the encoder froze up. We have no idea. It could have been a networking thing. We have had instances where our network router once every couple of months will kind of just freeze up or stop working for a while until you reboot it. I don't know if that was the problem. It didn't seem to be, because as soon as we powered up the ATEM again, everything was fine. So it didn't appear to be a problem with our router. So I'm not sure. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between SDI and HDMI, because I don't think a lot of people recognize the difference. Now, HDMI is a way of interconnecting devices. It's actually supposed to be intelligent. It actually negotiates between the two devices that you're connecting to figure out what to send from one to the other. So it's a two-way communication there. SDI is strictly one way. It's basically just, here's the signal, you figure it out on the receiving end. And the nice thing about SDI is that you can send it a lot farther over a single cable. The not so nice thing is it doesn't do all that negotiation, which for professionals, a lot of times you don't necessarily want it doing all that, because you don't want to be guessing what it's trying to do without having some very expensive equipment to plug in to figure out what the HDMI codes are doing or whatever. So that's why a lot of times you'll see SDI on the bigger sets, the more expensive productions. And then HDMI is used a lot more on consumer grade stuff, but we're seeing it on professional gear as well. But anyway, that's the important thing to understand. So for example, when our chat went down 2 weeks ago after we had to reboot the ATEM, when the ATEM came back up, the adapter was still plugged into the laptop and it didn't renegotiate the signal there. And so it didn't end up sending a signal. And so pulling that adapter out and then plugging it back in solved that problem. So that's what you have to keep in mind when you're troubleshooting HDMI signals. If you're not getting something, you have to a lot of times unplug and plug it back in so it can reinitiate that negotiation, figure out what's going on. All right, from Roland, I would suspect a networking issue, DNS issue, etc. Is the ATEM addressed statically? Because duplicate IPs can cause weird problems too. Yes, in my network here at home is set up so that we have reserved some static IPs for some of the gear, including the ATEM, including the HyperDeck, which is out in the other room. There are a few other devices as well that have static IP addresses, but those have all been resolved here on the local network. And then as far as my internet service, I believe it's a DHCP address. So I don't know if that's what you meant there, and as far as static IP addresses are concerned, but that's assigned via DHCP from the internet service provider. So the weird thing is if it was a network issue, power cycling the ATEM Mini seemed to solve it for whatever reason. Mike Strengths, the answer to all IT issues, switch it off and on again. That is a good troubleshooting step to take early on if you have to. Hi, Paul. It's good to have you here, and thanks for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Hope things are going well for you.
Lots of great questions.
Okay, Danny's digging up the questions. She said there are lots of good ones, which is good. Just while she's looking there, we did post a review of a couple of different mics. In fact, on the live stream where we had the failure, we were actually doing the initial work on those two microphones from 512 Audio, and got around to finalizing the final review, so those went up on the main channel this week. Mike says, I started recording in 1967, doing it for others from 1972, benefited hugely during the 70s from being mentored, and then went on to be able to mentor others. Yeah, and you know what's interesting, Mike? I'm glad you brought that up. It's funny because in the world today, it seems like it's hard. I don't know. It doesn't seem like there are quite as many opportunities for mentoring these days. Maybe I'm not seeing it right. I don't know, but it seems like, the benefit is that we now have the internet and we can have communities like this that we couldn't have in the 70s. On the other hand, this is not as hands-on. We can do demonstrations and things like that, and that's helpful as a start, but being hands-on and actually doing things for real in a real production, or even just helping get set up during, for a real production, there's nothing that can really replace that experience. And so glad to hear that you're doing some mentoring, Mike. That's, I think, sorely needed in this world today. All right. Would you happen to know how to find an internship for audio mixing or audio production for film? I don't. I've done a little bit of mentoring. There is a couple of people here in my local area that when I do productions, they've come along and offered to help out in various circumstances. So I've done some of that. So if you can find somebody in your local area, again, make sure that when you do that, be very careful and make sure that you're actually providing value to them as well, that you're helping them and not being a liability to them. And when they're on, when the show starts or the shooting starts, you have to stay out of their way and just do what you can to support them. Don't assume anything. So just be really clear about that. And there are potentially some opportunities there. You'll just need to do some digging around to find them. So if anyone has tips on how to find those people, in my case, because I have a YouTube channel and people know that I'm based in Utah, that's how those people reached out to me and contacted me via email, and we have done several things. So that's probably the best way I can think of to do it. But if they're not on YouTube or they're not on some very public facing thing, you're going to have to kind of dig around a little bit. For example, there's a movie studio. We live here pretty close to Park City up in the mountains, and Park City is where the Sundance Film Festival takes place. And there's also a movie studio just out here. And I've actually often thought of just dropping in at some point and just asking around to get to know the people that are there and to help out with their productions if they need anything. So sometimes you just have to be really bold and you have to be kind and don't step on any toes and don't make a scene. But ask questions and be bold that way. So there's some thoughts there for you. Mark, what are all the auxes used for? Well, those are this mixer has the capability of having a variety of different auxiliaries. For right now, they're being used for nothing, but they could be used to make additional mixes. And to, So for example, in this case, if I were doing a live show, if I wanted to send auxiliary mixes to stage, that's what I would use those for. If I were on a movie set, I'd use the auxiliary mixes to send different mixes to script supervisor. Maybe for producers would have a different mix than the script supervisor would, a different one for the boom operator, so on and so forth. So just using different mixes.
Here are two that kind of go together.
Two questions that go together. What's a good cheap DAW aside from Audacity? I've tried Audition, but don't think it's worth the price. Okay. And apologies if you previously covered this, but what are your thoughts on iZotope's new subscription model option? Okay, actually, let's go back to the DAW question. They're somewhat related, but different. So a couple of different options out there. One that I used early on after Audacity was Reaper. Reaper is fairly affordable, and so that's a pretty good option there. If you want one that's entirely free, that's built into DaVinci Resolve, you can get DaVinci Resolve from the Blackmagic Design website. 100% free, but it's a bigger application that's for video editing, coloring, compositing, and mixing. So they have a Fairlight module in there, which is a complete DAW. And it's maturing pretty nicely. So that's probably the best free option, I guess I would say, out there. But Reaper is a good one to check out as well. Reaper is, in terms of audio, basically all of them are very high quality these days. So those are the two that I would look at first, beyond Audacity. Okay, now on to the iZotope question.
We have a comment.
Oh, regarding DAWs. I use DaVinci Resolve's Fairlight, and I'm now making money doing VO with it. There you go. Very good. Thanks, Rob, for sharing that. And that's great. That's great news. Rob has that silky smooth voice that I think would work well for that. So,
okay, now I'm going back.
Okay, we're going back to the iZotope question. I actually had a person from iZotope reach out to me just recently. We had an interesting conversation, and I mentioned this to them. I am not a huge fan. I just feel like there's this crushing feeling of all these subscription services nowadays. And I get it, the companies need to be able to continue to operate. But I still find it's tough with software. I don't know what to think. Let me just say, I'm not a huge fan. I like to have the option of just buying if I need that option. So that's my particular personal feeling on that. As of right now, iZotope still gives you both options. Pro Tools, for Avid Pro Tools, they've basically forced everyone. I mean, you can still buy a perpetual, or what is it? It's not a perpetual license now. They've taken away perpetual licenses, I think. I think basically you can buy a license and you get updates for 1 year, and then after that you're on your own, which is kind of silly. I don't know. Is it silly? You have to understand there are two sides to the story. A company has to, if they're going to make innovative forward progress, they have to pay engineers to do that and product managers and people to do that. So they have to have a source of income. I don't know. I think we're seeing less and less of the perpetual license sales model, it seems like, and more subscription. So yeah, I feel like if you're going to do, if I'm a company and I'm going to have a subscription option, I think the price needs to be very aggressive. That is to say, quite low, to make it worthwhile. I will say this, for example, one thing that I don't, Danny and I were just talking about this last week, in fact, about Dropbox. It's like Dropbox is, it's pretty darn expensive. If you just want, 50 gigabytes of storage space, and every time somebody shares something with you, it uses your storage space. And so it just gets really expensive really fast. And it's like $30 a month, which is like, whoa, $50 a month. 15. Oh, okay. There's a $15 option
for 2 terabytes.
In any case, to me, I feel it seems like those are the kind of services that are pricing themselves out of the market, as long as other services exist that offer the same functionality that are less expensive. So anyway, that's my thought on that. I could rant on that for hours, and let's not do that. This is a sound for video session, so we're going to move on. Roland, can you talk a bit about optimizing a mix for various classes of headphones like IEMs, open cans, closed cans, et al.? I struggle sometimes trying to optimize for all. Well, the trick is that it's like you can't optimize it for all ultimately, and that's the trick. And I think what I've started doing for online videos, to be honest, is that I will do my first pass of the dialogue mix in headphones. And so I'm just using, in this case, mostly the DT770 Pros from Beyerdynamic. So I'll do the first pass there because I want to be able to hear all the little mouth clicks and stuff like that I need to clean up. But then I'll often go out to my near field monitors to do that, and then I'll check at the end again with the headphones just to make sure I didn't miss something or didn't do something. So a lot of the EQ, the initial stuff, the cleanup, I'm going to be doing in these headphones. And then the rest of it is really, from my point of view, having a set of speakers and headphones that you trust, that you know really well, and then being able to make your mixing decisions with those. So it's really, the thing is if you check on a million different sets of headphones and everyone's going to be different. If you don't know all of them equally well, then you're going to be kind of chasing this dragon all the time. I mean, you're never going to have a perfect mix on all of them. So the reason I say that it's important to know the particular headphones and or near field monitors that you're mixing on is because then, you know that whatever plays back on some other better or worse set of playback transducers, speakers, headphones, whatever, that they're going to apply their own color to them. And that's fine. I think really what I'm mainly aiming for is something that sounds good on the headphones and the speakers that I know well. I know their strengths, I know their weaknesses, I know where they overemphasize things, I know where they underemphasize things. And so I have that as part of my operating model. And so I try to go for a fairly neutral but good sounding mix. And then from there, I have to trust that it's going to translate. And, every other device is going to apply whatever color it applies, and you live with it from there. That's how I generally approach that. I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but it's a great question, and I would love to hear what some other experienced mixers have to say about that as well. Andres, Other than the Sanken Cost 11, what other lavs do you like for corporate work? I have a Sennheiser G4 with their regular lavs and 2 Deity Lav Pro paired with a 416. Well, the ones I typically use are the Shure Twinplex TL48. That's probably my favorite. That one is just such a great sounding microphone. It's not as small as some others, but it's not the diameter of the. It's a tubular design like the Sanken, but it's not. The diameter's a little wider. It's not quite as long, so it's just a kind of a trade-off. Still easy to hide. I also have a DPA 4160, and that one I like to use during corporate work a lot too because it's easy to hide in a buttonhole on a button-down shirt. So that's typically why I use that one. I don't love the sound of that one quite as much. Everyone has different feelings about that. That's my personal feeling on that particular mic. To me, that one sounds a little bit mid-range, hyped, and so I don't love that one. I mean, it can always be EQ'd. That's the thing about I've never found a DPA microphone that I couldn't make sound good, but I have found, for example, the Sennheiser ME2s, especially the original ME2s, they do something up in those high frequencies that I don't think it's realistic to expect it to sound great, even if you EQ it in post, just because it's doing something really weird and distorting and on certain voices at least. So the MKE2, on the other hand, is very good. I've used it. I don't own one. So the two I use the most are probably the Twinplex. I also have a couple of, Shure has a new Duraplex out now that I am going to evaluate here in the next couple weeks. So I think we talked about that last week. Those are probably my favorites. Lots of other people have favorites too, but those are some to consider. Lloyd says, when supporting schools remotely, I use the X32 quite a bit, and I will get them to connect a laptop to the board and control software, and then I can remote. Very cool. Into their laptop and control the system. It's so easy to help with troubleshooting. Very nice. Yeah, that is pretty cool. That's pretty cool that we can do that these days. All right. Thank you, Lloyd. Mark says, more pros get their message out online. It's become a revenue stream instead of mentoring only. That's been my experience in the professional photography world since the 80s. Let's see, more pros get their message out online. It's become a revenue stream instead of mentoring only. Oh, okay. So I think what you're saying, Mark, to go back to the mentoring discussion, maybe that's part of what we're seeing here is that instead of mentoring face-to-face, hands-on, a lot of pros can essentially access a larger audience of people who are interested in learning online. And so they do more of that as opposed to the hands-on kind of mentoring. That's an interesting perspective and probably a very valid point. That makes sense. All right, Gregor, just going through all your paid videos, awesome content. Cannot wait to use my MixPre 3.2. Quick question, I'll use a Rode Wireless Go Lav as a backup of my boom. Which gain to use on the Rode when I feed it into the MixPre? Lowest gain setting on the Rode and adjust all on the MixPre? Well, let's see. So it's a mic level. I think you're going to have to do some experimenting with that. Probably I would go with the... Are you going to go into 3.5 millimeter input on the MixPre or one of the XLR, two of the XLR inputs? Are you using an adapter to go into the XLR inputs? That's a question, I guess. Good gain staging question. I don't know on the the Wireless Go 2. Basically, the only control you have on the Wireless Go 2 is an output level, and you get, I think, 3 stages, 3 options: low, medium, and high. I don't know which one is basically the equivalent of Unity. I would guess it's the middle one, but I don't know that for sure. So I would probably do a little bit of experimenting with that and see if it changes the overall quality of the signal. So when you do get them both, or when you have both of them, I would set the Wireless Go's output to its lowest setting, do an audio test, recording into the MixPre. You'll adjust the gain in the MixPre then to compensate and get the levels where you want them. Then I would set it to mid and adjust the MixPre down probably some, do a test there, and then compare them all in post and listen carefully where you can. and see if you can hear a difference. So that was probably how I would go about doing that. You could also contact Rode support and ask them, say, hey, if I'm going into a high quality recorder or mixer, which one is unity output? Is it low, mid, or high? And hopefully they can give you some info on that. All right, this is the last question for today. There are many more questions, but this is the last one we have time for. Thank you, everybody. Let me just get this ready here. All right, we've got that ready to go. This is a question from Ono Coffee. Any thoughts on the Tascam HS P82 and DR680 recorders? If I remember, the HS P82 is a field recorder from probably, I don't know when those first came out, but they were pretty impressive recorders and mixers, and they're pretty, it's kind of big, so if you're going to carry it in a bag, it's pretty heavy. But it had quite a few inputs and outputs, and I never used one, so I don't know what the quality of the preamps was, but there were plenty of people who were pretty enthusiastic about them, so I don't know if they still make them. I don't think they do, but maybe they do. So anyway, it was a pretty big hunk of metal that would go into a bag. I think that was the main complaint that people had about them, is if you were doing bag mixing, that it was just too heavy. Otherwise, people were quite happy with them, and they did quite a bit in terms of firmware updates over the years for them. So I heard very positive things. The DR680 is, I think you'll see those a lot more on indie sets. I don't know if they're actively updating. I think they came up with a Mark II version of that, if I'm not mistaken. But I would expect them to be about the same quality as the earlier, or the smaller DR series from Tascam. So they're okay. At that price point, I mean, I think you're getting up closer to $800 or $1,000, as I recall. Been a long time since I looked at them, but I'd probably save up for something, one of the newer ones, like a MixPre or a Zoom F series, like an F8N would probably be my choice over one of those.
Two quick thoughts.
Do you have any tips for recording delicate sounds? Along with a super chat. Cold light of day. Thank you for that question. Delicate sounds. Yes. Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing it if you're recording sound effects, for example, I've experimented some with moving, changing the distance of the microphone based on what you're trying to do. So the context of where it's going to end up is really important. So if the audience is, you have to take into account the audience's perspective. So if you're doing a recording of the keyboard and you mic it up really, really close, you're going to get a slightly different sound than if you back the microphone up a little bit. So I think you try to match you have to take into account at least the perspective the audience is going to hear. However, if you do a close recording, you can EQ it some in post to essentially replicate the perspective for the audience. So those are two things to take into consideration. And I think to a large extent, it requires a lot of experience, just experimenting. I was going to say experience, but I think what I really mean is experimenting and finding what works for your particular piece. So whenever I've done Foley and sound effects recording, I try to get a closer perspective and a perspective that's not quite so close. So I have a few more options, and I can see and listen to hear which one fits better for the particular. I'm thinking about this from the perspective of sound effects and Foley. Hopefully that is relevant to what you were thinking about. If you're talking about ASMR, that's a different matter. I don't know if that's what you had in mind or not. Or maybe nature recordings, that's another one a lot of people have a lot of questions about. And I think in that case, a lot of times camera perspective makes sense in those situations. But there have been others that have done things that are different than that, different than camera perspective. And especially when you're using a much more directional microphone, you can capture things that are farther away, and yet it still seems to fit with what you're trying to accomplish with a picture. So I don't know if any of that makes any sense, but my take is, if you have an option, experiment with doing closer, moving the microphone closer and moving the microphone farther away, and deciding based on your ears and what you're hearing, which fits better for what you're trying to accomplish. Rob, Regarding my voiceover career, it's all due to my Curtis Judd commemorative edition Stellar X2 microphone. That is where Rob and I actually originally met. He emailed me. He said, hey, all these people have reviewed this microphone and they have different opinions, and I'd be curious for you to review it as well. And so I did. And then when I was done with it, he said, I'll buy it off you when you're done with it. And so he did buy it from me, but he insisted that he would only buy it if I signed it. And actually, it turns out that microphone is a pretty good fit for Rob's voice. In fact, we did a little A/B. I can't remember if it was 3 mics, I think, Rob, that we listened to, and you sent in a little video, and we did it on a live stream a few months ago here. But it does fit your voice really nicely. So I'm really glad it's in your hands and helping you with your voiceover career.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. Now we have something else. Quote, sounds like we can keep Creative Judd talking with super chats. Okay. We gotta wrap this, people. Danny has another thing she has to get. Whoa. Should I get an NTG5 for Foley and sound effects?
There's so many more questions.
Okay. So that's a good one. Here's the thing with the NTG5. I really like that microphone, but I've gotten a lot of people contact me more recently saying they're having technical issues with it. So I used to highly recommend it, and now I'm starting to scratch my head. Mine still works fine, but other people are getting weird. I don't even know how to describe them. It's not RF interference, but it sounds like some sort of weird screechy thing that goes on. So I like it. I like that it's small. I like the way it sounds when it works, and mine works great. But some people are experiencing some issues. So just be prepared if you do go that route. It should have a 10-year warranty, and I would hold road to it. If you want to avoid all that, a couple of other options, I would probably look at an NTG3 would be my first option to look at, or a Sennheiser MKH416 for sound effects. All right. Is that everything? No. Danny says we have to end because she has to go somewhere else right now. So thank you, everybody, for coming to our Sound for Video session. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.
rise and fall.